Some people don't come back into your life gently. They walk in bleeding, carrying every memory you tried to bury. It was raining so hard that night the clinic windows rattled every few seconds. The clock above the reception desk read 2:13 a.m. I remember because I kept staring at it, praying my shift would end before another emergency came through the door. The coffee beside me had already gone cold. My eyes burned from being awake for almost 20 hours straight. Outside, thunder rolled over the city like distant drums. Then the front door opened. Slowly, a man stepped inside wearing a black wool coat, soaked with rain. Water dripped from the edge of his sleeves onto the white tile floor. His shoulders looked heavy. Not tired. Dangerous. I stood up immediately. Sir. He didn't answer right away. The fluorescent lights flickered above him, revealing a sharp jawline, dark hair damp from the storm, and a face I knew too well. My breath stopped. Ethan Moretti. 6 years disappeared in 1 second. My hand slipped off the counter. The pen I was holding hit the floor with a tiny crack that sounded louder than the thunder outside. Ethan looked at me the same way people look at ghosts. Silent. Unmoving. Like he wasn't sure if I was real. He closed the door behind him carefully before finally speaking. Claire. Just my name. Low and rough. But hearing it again after all those years felt like someone reopening a wound I spent forever trying to stitch shut. I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe correctly. The last time I saw him was on a freezing November night outside a hotel in Brooklyn. He told me to leave. Told me it was the only way to keep me safe. Then he vanished before sunrise without a single explanation. No phone calls. No messages. Nothing. I buried him in my memory the same way people bury the dead. But there he was, standing 10 feet away from me with rain on his coat and pain hidden behind those dark eyes. My gaze dropped lower. His hand pressed tightly against his ribs beneath the coat. You're hurt, I whispered automatically. Doctor instincts. Survival instincts. Maybe both. Ethan gave a faint nod, but never stopped staring at me. I didn't know this. Clinic was yours. His voice sounded weaker than I remembered. That scared me more than the injury. Men like Ethan Moretti were never weak. I walked around the counter slowly, forcing my hands not to shake. Come with me. He followed without another word. The hallway lights painted pale shadows across his face while I led him toward the treatment room in the back. The smell of antiseptic filled the air. Rain tapped softly against the windows now, gentler than before. But my pulse only grew louder. Ethan sat down on the examination table with controlled movements, though I noticed the tension in his jaw every time he breathed. I grabbed scissors and carefully opened the side of his coat. The white dress shirt underneath was stained dark near his ribs. This needs stitches, I said quietly. I figured. I reached for my gloves, but the moment my fingers touched his shirt, Ethan suddenly caught my wrist. Not hard, just enough to stop me. Warm fingers around cold skin. I looked up. His eyes searched my face like he was trying to understand how I was standing in front of him after all this time. Then his gaze slowly dropped toward the small scar near my wrist. The scar from that night. His expression changed instantly. And for the first time since walking into the clinic, Ethan Moretti looked afraid. The room suddenly felt too small for both of us. Ethan still held my wrist gently, but his eyes were fixed on the scar like it carried answers he had spent years searching for. Rain slid down the clinic windows behind him, turning the city lights outside into blurred streaks of gold and white. I swallowed hard and slowly pulled my hand back. You need stitches, I whispered again because it was easier than saying everything else trapped inside my chest. Ethan leaned against the examination table for a second, breathing slower now, but the tension in his face never disappeared. I opened the sterile kit with careful hands while the sound of paper tearing filled the silence between us. 6 years. 6 years without hearing his voice. 6 years of pretending I had moved on. Yet one look at him, and every wall inside me cracked open like thin ice. I searched for you, he said. Suddenly, my hands froze. I kept my eyes on the surgical thread. Do not. His voice dropped lower. Softer. Do not lie to me tonight, Claire. I looked up then. Really looked at him. Ethan Moretti still carried that same dangerous calm around him. The kind that made every room feel smaller the second he entered it. But there was something else now. Exhaustion. Regret. Maybe loneliness. It sat heavily behind his eyes. You disappeared, I said quietly. You told me to leave Brooklyn and never come back. Ethan stared at me for a long moment before giving a faint shake of his head. That is not what happened. A cold feeling moved through me instantly. What? Thunder rolled outside again, deeper this time. Ethan slowly loosened the cufflinks on his sleeve like the memory itself physically hurt him. I waited for you that night. My chest tightened so fast it almost hurt to breathe. No, I whispered. You left. I never left. His words landed like stones in still water. Heavy. Impossible to ignore. I stepped back slightly, confusion mixing with anger that had been buried for years. I stood outside that hotel for an hour. I said, your driver told me you changed your mind. Ethan's expression darkened immediately. Driver? Yes. He looked away for the first time since entering the clinic. His jaw tightened hard enough for me to notice it under the fluorescent lights. Then he muttered something under his breath in Italian. I did not understand the words, but I understood the emotion behind them. Rage. Not at me. At someone else. Suddenly Ethan sat down harder against the edge of the table, one hand pressing his ribs again. I noticed how pale he had become. You should have gone to a hospital, I said automatically while reaching for disinfectant. Too many people watching hospitals tonight. Who? Ethan let out a dry laugh, without humor. People who would enjoy seeing me disappear. I cleaned the wound carefully while silence settled between us again. The scent of antiseptic mixed with rain drifting through the cracked window nearby. Somewhere in the hallway, the old vending machine hummed softly. Everything felt strangely normal except for the fact that the man who once shattered my life was sitting inches away from me looking like he had been carrying the same pain all along. Then his phone vibrated in his coat pocket. Ethan glanced at the screen once. Every trace of softness vanished from his face instantly. He stood up too quickly. What is wrong? I asked. Ethan slipped the phone away without answering. But before he could speak, headlights suddenly swept across the clinic windows from outside. Not one car. Several. My heartbeat stopped. Ethan slowly turned toward the front entrance, his entire body going still. Then he looked back at me with an expression I had never seen on him before. Fear mixed with certainty. Claire, he said quietly, lock the back door. Right now. My body moved before my mind could catch up. I rushed past Ethan and down the narrow hallway toward the back entrance while my heartbeat slammed against my ribs so hard it almost hurt. Outside, the rain had slowed into a cold drizzle, but headlights kept flashing through the clinic windows in sharp white streaks. One car door closed. Then another. Heavy footsteps echoed faintly outside the building. Ethan followed behind me with controlled movements despite the pain in his side. I could hear the unevenness in his breathing now. Who are they? I whispered while locking the back door with trembling fingers. Ethan glanced toward the front lobby. People I used to trust. Something about the way he said used to made the room colder. I turned around slowly. Ethan, what is happening? He looked exhausted for the first time since I met him 6 years ago. Not physically. Spiritually. Like a man who had spent too long carrying things alone. You need to listen carefully, he said quietly. If they come inside, you stay behind me. Anger rose inside me immediately. This is a clinic, not one of your backroom deals. Ethan almost smiled at that. Almost. You still talk to me the same way. And you still avoid answering questions. Another set of headlights washed across the walls. Closer this time. My stomach tightened. Ethan walked toward the reception area carefully, one hand near his ribs while the other adjusted the sleeve of his dark coat. Even injured, he carried himself with a calm that felt unnatural. Dangerous men usually looked loud. Ethan never did. His silence was what frightened people. I stopped near the hallway entrance, watching him through the dim clinic lights. Memories kept crashing into me in pieces. His hand against the small of my back crossing New York streets. Espresso at midnight. The way he used to stare at me like I was the only quiet thing in his world. Then the memory shifted. That final night outside the hotel. Snow falling onto black pavement. His driver lowering the window and telling me Ethan was gone. I remembered crying all the way back to Queens in the back of a yellow cab while my phone stayed painfully silent. 6 years. 6 years believing I had not been enough for him to stay. Claire. His voice pulled me back instantly. Ethan stood near the front desk now, staring through the rain-covered glass doors. Did you ever wonder why nobody could find you after Brooklyn? I frowned slightly. What do you mean? He turned toward me slowly. Your records disappeared. My chest tightened. What? Medical school transfers. Apartment leases. Even your old number. His expression darkened. Someone erased your trail professionally. The room suddenly felt too quiet. I remembered strange things now. Mail going missing after I moved to Chicago. Unknown calls with nobody speaking. The feeling of being watched during my residency. At the time, I convinced myself it was stress. Ethan looked toward the parking lot again before lowering his voice. I thought you ran because of me. I thought you abandoned me. The words escaped before I could stop them. Ethan closed his eyes briefly like the sentence physically wounded him. Then a knock echoed against the front glass. Calm. Controlled. Not loud enough to panic anyone passing by. But it froze every nerve inside me. Ethan immediately stepped in front of me without hesitation. Protective. Instinctive. Familiar. Another knock followed. Then a man's voice from outside. Mr. Moretti, the voice called politely. We know you are in there. Ethan stared at the door silently while rain slid down the glass between them. I looked at him carefully, then noticed something terrifying for the first time. Ethan Moretti was not afraid for himself tonight. He was afraid for me. The man outside sounded calm enough to be ordering coffee instead of hunting someone through the middle of the night. That was what frightened me most. Ethan did not move from in front of me. His shoulders stayed squared toward the glass entrance while rainwater slid slowly down the dark fabric of his coat. The clinic lights reflected against the wet floor beneath him, turning everything pale and cold. Another knock echoed softly through the lobby. Mr. Moretti, the voice said again. You are making this more complicated than it needs to be. Ethan let out a slow breath through his nose. Controlled. Measured. But I noticed the tension in his hands immediately. Claire, he said quietly without looking back at me. Go into your office and lock the door. No, his jaw tightened slightly. This is not a request. Then stop talking to me like I am one of your employees. For half a second, silence hung between us. Strange timing for an argument. Yet somehow it felt familiar. Ethan slowly turned his head toward me, and there it was again. That look he used to give me years ago whenever I challenged him. Frustration mixed with admiration. You always did this, he murmured. Did what? Refused to be afraid of me. I folded my arms tightly even though my pulse would not calm down. Maybe because I knew the version of you nobody else did. Something changed in his face after that. Softer. Sadder. Outside, another car engine shut off. More footsteps approached through the rain. Ethan glanced back toward the entrance immediately. That version of me does not exist anymore. I do not believe that. The words escaped before I could stop them. Ethan stared at me for a second too long. Then suddenly the lights flickered overhead. Once. Twice. The old clinic generator hummed loudly in the back hallway. My stomach dropped. They cut the power line, Ethan said under his breath. How do you know? Because this is how they send messages. Thunder rolled over the city again while dim emergency lights switched on along the hallway floor, washing the clinic in a low red glow. Everything suddenly looked unreal. Ethan reached into his coat pocket and pulled out his phone again. No signal. His expression darkened immediately. Perfect. I stepped closer without thinking. Ethan, who are these people? For the first time all night, he looked directly into my eyes before answering. My family. Cold spread through my chest instantly. What? Not by blood, he clarified quietly. By business. I remembered rumors from years ago. Stories whispered across Manhattan restaurants and hotel bars. Ethan Moretti was not just wealthy. He belonged to a world people avoided naming out loud. A world built on loyalty that disappeared the second power shifted. Ethan suddenly winced slightly and leaned one hand against the reception desk. I noticed how pale his face had become under the red emergency lighting. Sit down, I said immediately. Claire, sit down before you fall down. To my surprise, he listened. Ethan lowered himself carefully into the chair beside the desk, while I grabbed fresh gauze from the supply cabinet nearby. My hands moved automatically, but inside my chest everything felt unsteady. I knelt in front of him to check the stitching near his ribs. His eyes stayed on me the entire time. Quiet. Heavy. You should not still care whether I live or die, he said softly. I paused. The truth hurt because I did not know the answer myself. Ethan watched me carefully before speaking again. I came here tonight because this was the only place in the city that still felt safe to me. My throat tightened instantly. Outside, headlights flashed across the windows again. Then the clinic door handle moved slowly for the first time. Ethan stood up immediately despite the pain in his side. The calm in his face vanished completely now. He looked toward the back hallway, then back at me. And in a voice barely above a whisper, he said something that made my blood run cold. Claire, I do not think they came here only for me. There is a moment when fear stops feeling loud. It becomes quiet instead. Heavy, sharp, like standing too close to the edge of something you cannot see in the dark. That was exactly how the clinic felt while the door handle moved slowly back and forth under someone else's hand. Ethan stepped closer to the entrance, placing himself directly between me and the glass doors without hesitation. The red emergency lights painted shadows across his face, making him look colder than ever. But I noticed something else too. His breathing had become uneven again. The stitching near his ribs was not enough. He needed rest. He needed a hospital. Instead, he was standing in a half-lit clinic at almost 3 in the morning protecting me from people he once called family. Ethan, I whispered carefully. What do they want from me? His eyes stayed locked on the entrance. I do not know yet. That is not an answer. It is the only honest one I have. Another soft knock echoed through the lobby. Then silence. Long enough to make my skin crawl. Ethan slowly reached toward the reception desk and picked up the old landline phone. Dead. He already knew it would be. I could see it in his face. They planned this, I murmured. Ethan nodded once. They knew I would come here. My stomach tightened instantly. How? That question finally made him look at me again. Real guilt moved through his expression this time. Because someone close to me has been watching you for years. The words hit harder than they should have. Watching me. He lowered his eyes briefly. I kept your name hidden after Brooklyn. Nobody was supposed to know where you ended up. But they did. Ethan gave a slow nod. Which means someone betrayed me a long time ago. Rain continued sliding softly down the clinic windows while the generator hummed overhead. I suddenly remembered little things that once seemed meaningless. The black sedan parked across from my apartment last winter. A stranger at the grocery store who somehow knew my first name. The feeling that every new place I moved to eventually stopped feeling private. My chest tightened. You think this has something to do with me disappearing? Ethan stared at me carefully before answering. I think somebody made sure we never found each other again. Silence settled between us after that. Not empty silence. Painful silence. The kind filled with years neither of us could get back. Outside, one of the car doors opened again. Slow footsteps approached the entrance. Ethan immediately straightened despite the pain in his side. Then a familiar voice called through the glass. You always were difficult, Ethan. Ethan went completely still. I saw something dangerous flicker behind his eyes for the first time all night. Not fear this time. Recognition. Who was that? I whispered. Ethan answered without looking away from the door. Luca. The name clearly meant something terrible because his entire posture changed after saying it. He used to be my closest friend. Used to. That word again. The clinic lights flickered once more before stabilizing. Then the man outside spoke calmly through the rain. We are not here to hurt the doctor. Ethan let out a humorless laugh under his breath. That means the opposite. I looked between the door and Ethan, my pulse climbing higher every second. What did you do, Ethan? His jaw tightened. Years ago, I trusted the wrong people. That is not enough to explain this. Finally, he turned toward me fully. Exhaustion filled his eyes now, along with something dangerously close to regret. The night you disappeared, he said quietly. I was supposed to choose between protecting you and protecting my empire. My throat tightened instantly. Ethan stepped closer slowly, his voice barely above a whisper now. Claire, I think someone made that choice for me before I even had the chance. The hardest lies to survive are the ones built around silence. Ethan stood only a few feet away from me, but suddenly 6 years felt unbearably close. Rain tapped softly against the clinic windows while the red emergency lights continued flickering across the walls like a warning none of us could escape. Outside, the man called Luca stopped speaking. The silence beyond the glass felt calculated now. Patient. Like they already knew time was working against us. I looked at Ethan carefully. What choice are you talking about? His eyes lowered briefly before returning to mine. The night you disappeared, somebody told me you left willingly. My chest tightened. That is impossible. I know that now. There was something painful in his voice that almost made me look away. Ethan rarely sounded uncertain. Tonight he sounded haunted. I folded my arms tightly against myself, trying to steady my breathing. After your driver sent me away, 2 men came to my apartment the next morning. Ethan went completely still. What men? I never knew their names. My voice sounded smaller than I wanted it to. They told me if I stayed in New York, your enemies would destroy both of us. Ethan stared at me in disbelief. What? I swallowed hard against the memory. They knew where my mother worked. They knew where my younger brother went to school. Even now, years later, remembering that fear made my stomach twist painfully. They told me I had 1 hour to leave the city. Ethan's expression darkened with every word. Claire, I thought you sent them. The sentence hung between us like broken glass. Ethan looked away sharply, his jaw tightening hard enough to make the muscle move beneath his skin. For the first time since he walked into the clinic, he looked genuinely shaken. I would never threaten your family. I believed him instantly. That was the worst part, because it meant someone else had been controlling our lives from the shadows all along. Another soft knock interrupted the silence. Calm. Steady. Luca again. Ethan, the voice called through the glass. This conversation does not need to end badly. Ethan let out a cold laugh under his breath. That depends on what you call bad. I stepped closer instinctively. Please stop talking like this. Ethan looked at me immediately, and something in his expression softened. You still think there is a peaceful version of my world. Maybe because I still think there is a good version of you. The room became very quiet after that. Ethan stared at me like the words physically hurt him. Then he moved suddenly, walking toward the front windows carefully while staying out of direct view. I followed a few steps behind. Through the rain-covered glass, I could barely make out 3 dark vehicles parked outside beneath the streetlights. Men stood near them holding umbrellas against the storm. Calm. Waiting. One figure remained. Closest to the entrance. Tall. Still. Luca was there the night we met, Ethan said quietly while watching the parking lot. At the restaurant. He nodded once. He told me falling in love would become my greatest weakness. I looked at him carefully. And was he right? Ethan stayed silent for several seconds. Then he finally turned toward me fully, and the exhaustion in his face nearly broke my heart. Claire, he said softly, you were the only thing in my life that ever made me want to become a better man. My throat tightened instantly. Before I could answer, the clinic lights suddenly went completely dark. The generator died with a low hum, throwing the entire building into silence. For one terrifying second, neither of us moved. Then footsteps echoed from somewhere inside the clinic hallway behind us. Not outside. Inside. Ethan immediately pulled me behind him while his voice dropped into something cold and deadly calm. Stay close to me. Darkness changes people's voices. It strips away confidence. Makes every breath sound uncertain. The clinic hallway disappeared into shadows after the generator failed, leaving only faint rain light leaking through the front windows. I could barely see Ethan standing in front of me, but I felt him reach back instinctively until his hand found mine. Warm. Steady. Protective. The footsteps echoed again somewhere deeper inside the building. Slow. Careful. Whoever it was knew exactly where we were. My pulse hammered violently in my ears. There should not be anyone else here, I whispered. Ethan tightened his grip on my hand slightly. Stay behind me. The footsteps stopped. Silence swallowed the clinic again so completely I could hear rainwater dripping from Ethan's coat onto the floor. Then a flashlight beam suddenly cut through the darkness from the hallway. Sharp, white lights swept across the walls before freezing on us. Relax, a familiar male voice called out calmly. If I wanted trouble, you would already know. Ethan's posture changed immediately. Not relaxed. Worse. Resigned. A tall man stepped into view holding a small flashlight in one hand and an umbrella in the other. Mid-40s maybe. Dark tailored coat. Silver watch glinting under the weak light. He looked more like a politician than someone who belonged in the middle of this nightmare. His eyes landed on me briefly before returning to Ethan. You look terrible, the man said casually. Ethan's voice turned cold. You should not have come here, Luca. Luca gave a faint smile that never reached his eyes. And yet here I am. I stayed close behind Ethan, trying to understand the tension moving between them. This was not simple hatred. It felt older. Personal. Luca glanced around the dark clinic before sighing softly. You always did choose dramatic places for reunions. Ethan stepped slightly in front of me again. Say what you came to say. Luca studied him carefully for a moment. You disappeared tonight without your security team. You ignored every call. Then somehow you ended up here. His eyes shifted toward me again. That made certain people curious. My stomach tightened. Ethan's jaw hardened instantly. She has nothing to do with this. Luca looked almost amused by that response. That is exactly the problem. Rain hit the windows harder outside, while thunder rolled somewhere over the city. Luca slowly walked farther into the lobby, his polished shoes quiet against the tile floor. Ethan never moved away from me for even a second. Do you know what your mistake was? Luca asked softly. Ethan did not answer. Luca stopped only a few feet away now. You spent years convincing everyone that Claire Bennett no longer mattered to you. Hearing my name from a stranger's mouth sent cold fear through me instantly. Luca noticed. Of course he did. Unfortunately, he continued calmly. Men like us notice the things people pretend not to care about. Ethan's voice dropped dangerously low. Leave her out of this. Luca finally looked at him with something close to disappointment. I tried to protect you once, Ethan. By threatening her family? Silence. Heavy silence. Luca's expression barely changed, but that tiny reaction told me everything. Ethan stepped forward immediately despite the pain in his side. It was you. Luca exhaled slowly. You were not thinking clearly back then. So you decided my life for me? I decided survival mattered more than love. The clinic suddenly felt unbearably small. Ethan stared at Luca with a level of anger I had not seen before tonight. Not explosive anger. Worse, controlled anger. The kind that comes from betrayal too deep for shouting. Then Luca looked directly at me again. Do you know how dangerous he became after you disappeared? Ethan cut him off sharply. Enough. But Luca ignored him completely. For 6 years he destroyed anyone connected to your disappearance, trying to find answers. My breath caught. Ethan looked away immediately like he could not bear hearing it out loud. Luca lowered his voice then, softer now. And tonight, Claire, certain people realized something very unfortunate. I felt Ethan's hand tighten around mine again. Luca's next words landed like ice in my chest. You are still the only person Ethan Moretti would burn his entire world down to protect. People think heartbreak feels loud. It does not. The real kind happens quietly. In the way someone avoids your eyes. In the words they never say until it is too late. Luca's sentence still echoed in my chest, while rain continued falling outside the dark clinic windows. You are still the only person Ethan Moretti would burn his entire world down to protect. Ethan slowly released my hand and stepped farther into the lobby, placing more distance between me and the danger standing in front of us. His face had gone completely unreadable again. Cold. Controlled. The version of him the rest of the world feared. You should leave, Ethan said quietly to Luca. Luca gave a disappointed smile. You know I cannot do that. Then at least stop pretending this is concern. Luca sighed softly and removed his gloves one finger at a time. I warned you years ago what attachment would cost you. Ethan's eyes darkened. And I warned you never to involve Claire. Silence. Heavy and immediate. Luca looked toward me briefly before speaking again. You still do not understand what is happening here, do you? I swallowed hard. Then explain it. Luca nodded slowly like he had expected that answer. The men outside are not loyal to Ethan anymore. They are loyal to whoever controls the organization now. I looked at Ethan instantly. Controls? Ethan stared at the floor for a second before answering. 3 months ago, I walked away. My breath caught. What? Luca watched my reaction carefully. He gave up half his empire in exchange for peace. I could barely process the words. Ethan Moretti. The man who once controlled half of Manhattan from behind quiet meetings and colder silences. Gone. Why? I whispered. Ethan finally looked at me then. Real emotion cracked through his calm for the first time all night. Because I got tired of becoming someone you would hate. The room fell completely silent after that. Rain tapped softly against the glass while the emergency lights flickered weakly overhead. I stared at him, trying to understand how many invisible wars he had been fighting while I spent years believing he forgot me. Luca folded his umbrella carefully beside the reception desk. Unfortunately, he said quietly, when powerful men step away, someone else always takes their place. Ethan's voice turned sharp again. Get to the point. Luca looked directly at me now. The people outside believe Claire is the reason Ethan abandoned everything. Cold fear spread slowly through my chest. That is insane. No, Luca replied calmly. It is dangerous. Ethan stepped toward him immediately. You should not have brought them here. I did not. Luca's expression hardened for the first time. I came because I was trying to stop this before they arrived. Ethan paused. That answer clearly surprised him. Luca lowered his voice slightly. There are people above me now, Ethan. Men who think emotion makes leaders weak. The clinic suddenly felt smaller again. Trapped. Ethan rubbed one hand over his face slowly, exhaustion finally showing through the cracks in his composure. How much time do we have? Luca glanced toward the rain-covered parking lot outside. Not enough. I looked between both men, my pulse climbing higher every second. Someone please tell me what is actually going to happen. Ethan turned toward me immediately. His face softened the second his eyes met mine. I am getting you out of here. No, both men looked surprised by the force in my voice. I stepped closer to Ethan slowly. I spent 6 years running from shadows because of your world. My throat tightened painfully. I am not doing it again. Ethan stared at me like he could not decide whether to be frustrated or devastated. Claire. No. Tears burned behind my eyes now, but I refused to look away from him. If you love me the way everyone keeps saying you do, then stop deciding my life for me. Ethan went completely still. The words hit him harder than anger ever could. Outside, another pair of headlights turned into the parking lot. Luca looked toward the windows instantly, his expression changing for the first time all night. Serious. Urgent. Then he said the one sentence none of us were ready to hear. They are here. The strange thing about life is that sometimes the moment everything falls apart is also the moment everything finally becomes clear. The clinic windows glowed faintly under the rain, while new headlights filled the parking lot outside. More black cars. More shadows moving behind wet glass. Luca looked tense for the first time since entering the building, and somehow that frightened me more than the men outside ever could. Ethan stood completely still beside me. Quiet. Focused. Like he had already accepted whatever came next. Then he looked at me. Really looked at me. And suddenly the noise outside stopped matching. Claire, he said softly, there is something I need you to understand. My throat tightened. Do not say goodbye to me. Pain flickered across his face so quickly I almost missed it. I spent 6 years trying to become someone who deserved a second chance with you. Rain rolled down the windows behind him like tears the city itself refused to hide. Ethan stepped closer slowly, his voice low and steady despite everything happening around us. But men like me do not walk away from that world cleanly. Then stop walking back into it. He almost smiled at that. Almost. You always made impossible things sound simple. Luca moved toward the entrance carefully, glancing through the glass. We are out of time. Ethan ignored him completely. His eyes never left mine. When I lost you, I thought power would make the emptiness smaller. His expression darkened slightly. It only made me colder. I felt tears burning behind my eyes again. Ethan, no. Let me finish this once. The room became painfully quiet. Even the rain outside seemed softer somehow. Ethan reached into his coat pocket slowly and pulled out a small silver key. I recognized it immediately. My old apartment key from Brooklyn. The one I thought disappeared the night I left. He placed it gently in my hand. I kept it all these years. My chest ached so hard I could barely breathe. Why? Ethan looked at the key for a moment before answering. Because some part of me believed if I ever saw you again, I would finally remember who I used to be. Outside, car doors opened. Voices moved closer through the storm. Lucas straightened immediately. Ethan. Ethan nodded once without turning around. Then he surprised me completely. He stepped back. Away from me. Like forcing distance between us physically hurt him. What are you doing? I whispered. His voice remained calm now. Certain. The only reason they still have power over me is because they know what I love. Fear spread through me instantly. Do not do this. Ethan's eyes softened in a way I had never seen before. Not cold. Not dangerous. Just tired. Human. Claire Bennett, he said quietly. You were never the weakness in my life. Tears finally slipped down my face. Ethan glanced toward the entrance one last time before looking back at me. You were the reason I finally wanted to become better. Then suddenly the front clinic doors opened. Cold rain air rushed inside, while dark figures appeared beyond the entrance. Luca stepped forward immediately, blocking part of the doorway, while speaking sharply in Italian. Everything began moving too fast after that. Voices. Footsteps. Shadows crossing the red emergency lights. But through all the chaos, Ethan never looked away from me. Not even once. He moved toward the entrance slowly, placing himself between me and the men outside like it was the most natural thing in the world. Then he stopped beside Luca and spoke one final sentence without turning around. If this ends tonight, he said quietly, at least now she knows I never stopped coming back for her. And for the first time in 6 years, I realized the man I thought abandoned me had actually been trying to find his way back to me all along.